This morning we have an interesting subject which I think has rather important practical implications here and now. We all know that a great change occurred in Europe at the time of the Protestant Reformation. At that time, the authority of the Roman Church to control the minds and destinies of most of Europe was broken forever. This power ceased, but nothing took its place. After the passing of a little time, Lutheranism took over as much as it could, but it was an entirely different type of belief. It was unable to meet the challenge of complete control of the religious life of the European people. Very soon other Protestant reformers began to appear, and a conflict of beliefs resulted. And this conflict has come down to us as a priceless heritage. Also very much in this period was the great period of war. Europe was in war most of the time in the early years of the Protestant Reformation. The 30 Years' War was a terrible experience for all concerned, and as might be expected, it was largely involved in religion. This problem brought many people to the realization that there was great need for some basic change in religious outlook. The collapse of the power of the Roman Church also had a strong effect upon secular matters. It began to undermine strongly. This change brought about a minor and later major change in the theory of governments. The divine right of kings gradually faded away, and the church and the secular governments both lost their totalitarian authority over the lives and thoughts of people. In this particular period of things, there arose in Europe a compensating factor. It suddenly became obvious to a great many persons that where leadership was removed, the individual had to stand on his own feet. It was as though Europe had come of age, that it could no longer depend upon a complete parental umbrella controlling, directing, and enfolding the people. It became necessary to begin a new way of life in which faith became increasingly personal. This is also clearly set forth in the great utopias that appeared in the 16th and 17th centuries. These utopias were imaginary worlds of religious, philosophical, and educational integrities. The utopias were worlds in which principles, truths, and ideals were to have sovereignty. The first of the utopias, of course, came from More and was possible because of the freeing of England from the power of the Church, which was finally lost through the destruction of the Spanish Armada. In any event, the utopians were a people of good hope, and almost all the utopias had to do with the improvement of society. All of them, however, with the possible exception of Bacon's New Atlantis, all of these utopian dreams were very conservative, rather stuffy, and quite orthodox. They were well intended, they were a great advancement over previous conditions, but they were also little tyrannies of themselves. Those who lived in these utopian atmospheres did not have freedom. They had only the right of total obedience. They had to do exactly as they were told, or else simply be cast out of the organizations. They were not allowed freedom of thought. They were only allowed to be free from a previous despotism and to fall into a smaller one which they had manufactured for themselves. This, of course, led largely to the concept of colonization in the Western Hemisphere, and most of the colonists, except the Spaniards, were utopians. They were people looking to build a new commonwealth in the Western Hemisphere. They came over here for freedom of belief, but in a very short time began to impose restrictions on that freedom, so that in the end a tremendous pressure of orthodoxy dominated nearly everything. So the great dream of a utopia was gradually lost, and the people were forced to come back to another pattern of life. It is as though a child became an adult, and with this adult condition was expected to take care of his own internal resources. This the average person was unable to do. The result was a gradual emergence of countless creeds, arising from private and personal convictions about truth, about religion, about God, and about the purpose for human destiny. All of these groups were more or less alike in most matters, but the dissimilarities were sufficient to separate them into very often conflicting groups. All of this leads down to the rise of mysticism in Germany and later in England, and particularly in Germany with the works of Jacob Boehme, and in England with the works of William Law. These mystics were in no sense of the word ordinary visionaries. They were not mediums, they were not psychics, but they were convinced that it was possible for the human being to have a direct internal experience of truth. Boehme went so far as to qualify this by the concept that he could find within himself that truth which was natural or proper to himself. Therefore, there might be different interpretations of truth, but if they came from within the person, they were largely suitable to his own personal needs. Well, this went on for a time, but then other factors began to intrude themselves. And finally, we find the rise of the new dispensation of dominant beliefs. We no longer had the power of the absolute divine right of kings, but we had political instruments that were becoming more powerful every day, and in many instances were just as tyrannical as the monarchies which they sought to overthrow. We also lost the control of a great moral and ethical concept of life as found in religion through the rise of science. And in science we find gradually human dependencies turned more and more upon external pressures and circumstances. The individual trusted his life to the doctor instead of God. And the doctor himself, however, might be in prayer at the moment. But that was the way it worked out in common practice. Little by little, man became more and more convinced that his destiny was hopelessly involved in the material environment in which he found himself. His new ambitions were not necessarily for self-improvement, but for creature comforts. He was not so much concerned with being right as he was concerned with being rich. And of course, these various personal ambitions, made into groupings, formed the basis of one war after another. Little by little, the policies which the human being tried to build to maintain himself in a world in which there was no longer any spiritual or moral authority. The effort to do this has led to utter confusion and very largely to the problems that we face today. We know that Bacon named his New Atlantis after the description found in the Critias of Plato concerning the submergence of the Atlantean islands. Bacon doesn't say anything about the possibility of another world catastrophe of this kind. But in sober thinking, we begin to wonder if earthquakes and volcanoes destroyed the islands that disobeyed God. We are now a little bit alarmed and concerned over the rise of nuclear fission, which could produce a still greater catastrophe than that which is recorded by Solon. We are in the presence of a great and immediate danger. And what have we to face it with? Most people are very much frightened. The whole way of life has become so centered on material comforts, material concepts, material environments, and the fulfillment of personal, material, and ambitions, that it seems impossible for the human being to survive the destruction of his own mistakes, or to continue to exist without the comforts that he has declared to be essential to his survival. So today we are in the midst of another problem very much like that of the 17th century Adventists. The problem of what is next, And how are we going to face it? Every day we pick up the newspapers and we find further cases of delinquency, further evidences of cruelty, and a continuing pageantry of selfishness and self-centered ambitions. It is obvious, I think, to most people, even the selfish ones themselves, that this procedure is impossible. The only possible end of it will be disaster. Now, in this phase, we are much like the 17th century people. They felt that the loss of their religious life and so forth was a great disaster. But they were determined to create a reformation that was to make this progress rather than destruction. We realize that they accomplished something. They did open the way for a complete revolution of knowledge and opened the way to most of the advancements in science and arts, literature, music, and so forth that we know today. But on the other hand, we are not exactly of a mind to make some kind of a major religious or spiritual step in the advancement of our problems. This is one of the things we face today. What is the only hope of the individual in the present situation? Surrounded by the dangers of delinquent children, surrounded by rape and carnage, surrounded by international complications that seem unsolvable, in the present continual uncertainty concerning employment and survival, with rising tides of individualism expressing through constant strikes and the creation and organizations of groups to defend or destroy certain causes. The answer is, what is the private citizen to do? He is in the presence of what might be called a tremendous personal emergency. An emergency of learning to understand the reason for the conditions as they are. And what is he going to do about it? Those who feel that the answer to the whole thing is annihilation are not certainly thinking very straight. They are thinking very largely in terms of a dismal melancholy, a frustration, a negative psychology. They are becoming gradually, like hundreds of millions of people today, near borderline psychotics, pushed into this situation and into this dilemma by insecurity which they cannot face and do not understand. Well, to meet this, there's been a revival, again, of mysticism. And mysticism is something we've had with us always. It was in the church. It was before the church. It was in Alexandria, in Athens, in Greece, in Egypt. Mysticism was always an experience of personal integrities. In mysticism, the individual develops an internal realization that he is a significant being, that he cannot be simply pushed aside or decimated by circumstances. He has inalienable rights, and the most important of his rights is that he has the right to be right. He has the privilege to live well regardless of the environment in which he finds himself. To transcend a material environment, each person must find a depth within himself. We spend a lot of time saying what is wrong with the environment, but we do not realize that it is our adjustment to the environment which is essentially destroying us. We are unable to survive the pressures of things outside of ourselves, and yet we have within ourselves principles that are indestructible. But we do not realize this and do not know how to use the tremendous internal potential that has been given to us by an all-wise providence. Actually, no individual is destructible unless he destroys himself. In some mysterious way, he must be the cause of his own failure. He must be the reason why he is a narcotics addict. This was not destined. This was not something that was predestined and foreordained. It was a weakness of himself, a lack of internal strength and integrities. And these in turn, in all fields of violence with which we are now suffering, alcoholism and gasoline do not mingle. All these things, and the crime waves, the accident waves, the adulterations of food, the exorbitant exploitation of the commonwealth, these things all rest with people. They are not something that rose out of an infinite demand for obedience or decimation. They were problems which we created ourselves. And we really recreated these problems because we were not strong enough to keep the principles that we believe. Actually, by recent testing and so on, and recent surveys that have been made, 4/5 of the Earth's population has religious affiliations. And the other 1/5, having little or no religion, is also comparatively indifferent. Also, occasionally, it presents the same kind of problem that religion itself presented in the times of the Holy Inquisition. Actually, however, the available resource of spiritual conviction is enormous. And the only reason why it is comparatively impotent in these times is because we don't use it. We are not able to capitalize on our own internal capacities for faith, strength, and courage. We have become so addicted to problems that the great tragedy is loss of material things. The infinite disaster is economic failure. While these are the attitudes, we are going to sacrifice principles for profit, and we are going to sacrifice our own inner life for the maintenance of things that are comparatively secondary. So the modern thinker is drifting back, at least in spirit, to what might have been termed mysticism. It was not the so-called false or shallow mysticism that was decried by Nicholas Murray Butler. It is a mysticism based upon a study of what is inside of the person. A realization that every physicist must ultimately face, namely that the human body itself is an unsolved mystery. We can take care of just about every part of the body except that which dwells within it. And as long as that which is the dweller in the body is sick, the body itself cannot remain a healthy and normal cooperating structure. We have to find out about the person in the body, the power behind the body, how strong it is, how thorough it can function, and how it can come to assist us in the present dilemma. Plotinus, of course, who was one of the greatest of the Neoplatonic mystics, was convinced that the power within the body was the savior not only of the body, but the savior of the mind and the savior of the world. There is a power of salvation in every living thing that, if it is applied, becomes part of an infinite potential for survival for all living things. In other words, if we could find the link and serve the inner life as well as we have served the outer compromises that have come to be considered normal, we would find a very great difference in the world affairs which we now face with so much fear and anxiety. So the mystics have a certain point on this subject, which is not a metaphysical point primarily. It transcends that. It is more like a mysterious science of the soul. It is something that has nothing to do with the common visionary experiences of psychics. It has to do with certain deep processes within ourselves. Plotinus describes the great journey of life as the journey of that which is lonely to final union with that which is forever alone. There is some way in which the individual going inside of himself finds allness, whereas if he continues forever going out from within into the world around him, he does not find allness, he finds ultimately nothingness. The mystics in the early modern times had many very interesting and constructive points of view. They all agreed that the final liberation of the individual from ignorance was self-discipline and self-attainment. That there was no possible way in which material education could save the individual, only if that individual uses education to release the inner life within himself. Education is to help him to be more rather than simply to increase his earning power. Enlightenment is not something that makes him master over other men. It makes him master over himself. Everything that has to do with the improvement of self is important to the common good. But the things which constitute improvement of self do not conflict in any way with the advancement of the collective. It is not the creation of the egotistic, self-centered self that wishes to dominate all others, but the self that, having no interest in dominating others, has found union with self. Having found union with self, honesty is possible. Honesty also has to do now with the courage necessary to achieve this union. And as in the case of the colonies that came over here, most of those that came to this country in the beginning, except the Spaniards, were utopians. They all came here searching for a new world in which they could live their principles. They came here for the holy experiment, as William Penn called it, the experience of creating a cooperative commonwealth, and to place at the head of that commonwealth an omniscient power. They were to serve God through the establishment of a way of life in which godliness was possible to the average person. It was the overcoming of selfishness and the overcoming of ambitions that dominated the theories behind men like William Penn. Yet when they came over here, within a short time they were in trouble. In a very short time they began to exile their own members for differences of opinion. Little by little economic processes took over, land was fought for, all kinds of misdeeds were committed against the native aborigines. Everything that had been part of the real principle gradually faded away to leave the powerful, destructive, industrial, economic complex which has gotten us into the present difficulty. Now, we know from the religions and beliefs of countless nations that faith is a tremendous thing. Now, what is faith? Faith is the cure for fear. Faith is that which makes it possible for the individual to remain dedicated through character and integrity with truths which he does not fully understand. He may not understand the universe, but as far as his own faith can go, he can treat that universe with respect, intelligence, and kindness. He may not know the end for himself, but faith gives him a realization that he was not created by an accidental power. He was not here for no reason, and the reasons for his being here are still under dispute because all knowledge today avoids these questions, considering them unanswerable or creating some kind of an arbitrary, insufficient solution to the eternal problem. Faith, therefore, begins with a quiet acceptance of the fact that there is a reason why we are here. There is also a reason why we are in trouble. And the reason why we are in trouble is because we are living in variance with the laws of nature and the laws of God. Now, many today do not like to think of the powers of God. God becomes a symbol of an autocrat. We have God more or less involved in the concepts that dominated the Middle Ages. But actually, we have to assume that somewhere there is something behind what is happening. There is some reason why the individual making certain mistakes always suffers. And there is also some reason why, when he corrects his mistakes, he suffers less. There is some kind of a law and order in everything, and every science has discovered the fact of law and order, but not always able to explain the workings of these facts or to define them completely. In daily life, therefore, we have people today who are in all kinds of disasters and distresses. We get phone calls every day from persons who are unable to carry their problems with dignity. They do not believe that they should be suffering. Well, we have to agree that probably they shouldn't be suffering, but they are suffering because of something they shouldn't be doing. And this goes on and on and on. Many people, for instance, have decided in their own minds that membership constitutes a solution to moral problems. It does not. You can belong to anything or nothing and be in the same trouble if you continue to make the mistakes that have gotten you into the trouble in the first place. There is no escape from difficulties by adding your name to a roster or presenting a church with a stained glass window. This is not an act of piety. It is bribery. And all types of bribery are unpleasant in the sight of divinity. We are not supposed to try to buy our way into a better state of life. This was one of the points that annoyed Martin Luther and resulted in his final separation from the church. We are not here to buy our way to heaven. We are not here to buy indulgences. We are not here to show our religion by attendance to anything. We are here to have the opportunity to grow. As one of the Rosicrucian mystics in the 17th century pointed out, we are all abecedarian students in the school of the Holy Spirit. In other words, we're in various grades, mostly apparently in the lower grades, of the hope of redemption. We are probably somewhere in the second or third grade, and we are all in the same little red schoolhouse together, and in this schoolhouse are the grades all the way from a kindergarten to a high school graduation, and all carried by the burdened life of one teacher. Now this more or less represents the general state of things as it is. The great universities do not change the facts very much, as Comenius so wisely pointed out. He pointed out very definitely that the only solution to the world's problem was personal honesty. And personal honesty is very hard to develop. Another thing Comenius was perfectly certain of was that we must depend upon the children of this generation to run the world in the next generation. And unless they are taught properly now, they will preserve the delinquencies of the present day into the infinite future. And Comenius said, you must start with the very basic principles of life and education. The most important of all educational factors is integrity. And every child should be taught to be honest before he is even taught to read and write. I think I mentioned before that I went over a curriculum that is in use in Japan in the school system of how the studies are arranged. And the curriculum for the grade school, which more or less corresponds to the German concept of the gymnasium, the curriculum for the grade school was integrity, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Integrity first. Honor before spelling, honor before adding and subtracting, and the use of adding and subtracting to maintain honor. And then you go to the college, it was the same. Before the geometry and the calculus came integrity. All the way through the educational system. Now this integrity principle is very hard to teach a person who has seen his own parents in trouble all their lives, who is a product of divorce or desertion, or whose education is limited to a school system in which all references to religion are regarded as unrealistic. The Comenius, who was the father of the present public school system, made it very definite that the beginning of a good life was to believe in realities, to honor that which is honorable, to obey the laws of the inner life as well as the codes of national conduct, and to know that forever throughout life we are living part of and involved in a tremendous integrity. If we violate that, we are lost. And the only way we can find out that we are lost is through natural punishment, which is in the form of suffering. Therefore, the beginning of our understanding is that we shall, without proof of a scientific nature, but a proof proven by tens of thousands of years of human experience, that the individual has the right to live well, that he has the right to keep the truths even if others break them, that he has the right to be honest regardless of temptation, and he has the right to be an intelligent creature unless he violates or sacrifices that right to maintain some stupid pattern of his own. So that out of this comes the old belief of Comenius, that the child should learn to know and to understand that he is living in a great divine university, in which by experience he learns all things, and that this experience is not only his teacher, but is also the instructor of every other living thing. For all creatures that inhabit the earth survive by experience, and also survive by keeping rules, which they intuitively or instinctively obey, whereas man who has a better mind is given largely to breaking them. So we have the great need for a recognition of faith, a faith against defeatism, a faith against the gradual collapse of our personal lives, the breaking of our homes, our disappointments in children, rising crime, mutilation of property. All of these things exist. And they exist because something is wrong. And that something that is wrong is a higher intellectualism on one side, which has denied the integrities that we most need, and an extravagant economic materialism on the other that tells us that the most important thing is to be rich. Lord Bulwer Lytton, in one of his stories, tells us the story of the young man whose father taught him that there was nothing important in life but money. He should get it, no matter how, but he should get it. And as a result of long indoctrination in this concept, the young man killed his father to inherit his fortune a little sooner. And this is very largely what we're doing. This is our problem. And the only way we have to get out of it is to believe there's something better. And the moment we believe something better, we are believing by means of faith. It is faith that reveals to us the possibilities of all good. And this faith is sustained by the experiences of 100 different cultures and civilizations, that all have passed through the same experiences and have all failed from the same causes. And there is no reason to assume that we will not fail also if we do the same things that they have done, make the mistakes they made, and forever compromise principle and truth for profit. Now, war is one of our great enemies, and nuclear physics is another. These are now combined together. Even assuming that we never do have a nuclear war, the race for nuclear armament is going to finally leave us with a planet so polluted by waste material from atomic research and nuclear research that we can't live on it. All of these things go on and on and on, and are a strange evidence to absolute mediocrity of thinking. They are really little better than the attitudes of a person psychologically disturbed. And we consider this disturbance by a variety of names, but the answer is that we are sick. We are sick because of the fact that we have lost a vision of constructive purpose. We have lost the dream of being something that would be a pride to pass on to the future. We are not only no longer planning to pass something worthwhile along to the future, but at the moment we are afraid that we have destroyed the future along with ourselves. Now, this type of thinking is fear. And fear is destroying our morality. It is undermining our education. It is making it apparently desirable to have all the fun you can for today because tomorrow you will be dead. This was the old Roman concept and is the reason why they put a skeleton at the banquet table. It was to remind that only one end comes to all, the dance of death, the endless procession that ends in the grave. Now all of this doubtful, negative thinking is gradually taking over. And we do not know what to do about it. We would like to have better leaders, but leaders have to be chosen from the ranks of followers. And while the followers are as they are, the leaders will be no better. We would like to have someone come along and solve the whole thing and sign a great treaty by which we would end forever all nuclear competition. The question is, how are we going to find anyone to sign that treaty? How are we going to find anyone so much better than we are that they will keep rules that we would break to personal advantage at any moment? So we come right back to the problem of building an inner life to take care of whatever happens on the outside. We are part of something that is larger than we are. The belief that man survives amidst the phenomenon of death has been universal. And this universal sense of survival, this is something that must go on. Whether you wish to assume that this going on is through progeny or through the perpetuation of the internal self in our own natures, the problem is something must go on. And something that goes on must be better than what we have now, or it won't go on. So each person has to make his own adjustment. For this problem, when it comes to the end of life, each one of us must face our own conduct. We must meet the ends which we have come to deserve. And after we go into the earth, we will no longer be able to blame anybody for anything. We have the need to build a decent life now, and build a good life now. Some years ago, I was present at the deathbed of a very nice young man. He was happily married. He had 2 lovely children. He was well-to-do, and he was a trained scientist. He was an educated man, a university man, frightened to death. Death was not the worry, primarily probably, it was the fear of death. He did not want to die. He felt it was a great injustice, and yet sarcoma had taken him. And I was with him just a few hours, in fact, a few minutes before his death. I saw that strange gray pale go over him when death came. And you couldn't but wonder to yourself what this was all about. That this individual went out of this world frightened to death, went out of this world feeling that it was entirely impossible that this could have happened to him, when he had proof beyond evidence that he was a successful man. I remember the last day before he passed, he looked at me and he said, I wonder, is there something beyond this? Is it true that there may be a life beyond this? He couldn't be sure in himself, but he began to wonder. Now today most people are wondering if there are any times beyond the ones we're in. Are there going to be days in which good things can happen? Are there going to be times when our children and our children's children will grow up in a decent world? The answer very largely rests with us. It rests with the ability of the individual to become a servant of realities rather than to a servant of profit and loss. If we can achieve the integrity of the inner life, we will have a great reward. And the little book, The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence, is something to mention in this case. Peace arising from faith in the divine purpose. Faith in an invisible good at the root of existence. Faith that what we're going through is part of a purposed existence, and that we are like children who do not want to go to school and are perfectly willing to cheat in the examinations if we can get away with it. But that actually, as the Greeks assumed, this world we live in is a threshold of eternity. And Socrates, a few moments before his death, told them that were gathered around, he said, this is a situation that I must face. Either when I finish this life, in the next few minutes, I will go into a world that is larger than any I have ever known, and here I will meet and know all the truths which I have sought to understand. Here I will have no further doubt about immortality or the reality of divine powers. I will go forth to the solution of my noblest convictions and dreams, or I will go to eternal sleep. But in either case, I will be more fortunate than those men who have falsely accused and convicted me, and must keep on for some years themselves to live with the conscience evils that they have caused. This is more or less the problem as we face mysticism and as we face faith. So in this point, faith, as St. Paul points out, becomes a very important thing to us. It is the ability to live a good life, keep our principles, and practice the integrities we hold to be sacred. Most of us gathered here today are idealists. We believe in these principles. We believe in the integrities of life. But somewhere between the fulfillment of faith and our present frame of mind, there is a barrier. And that barrier is that the faith is held in one department of the mind, but fear governs another. The conflict between faith and fear in ourselves is tremendous. Also, the compromise by means of which we voluntarily sacrifice faith in order to improve the environment in which we live, this also is very important in our thinking. I know when people that we meet with and work with all the time are good people. They are kindly people. But for some reason, nearly all of them carry some mark of insufficiency. One is jealous, and at the same time feels perfectly satisfied that he is profoundly religious. Another is a constant cynic, decrying, low-grading everything in his environment. He believes that he is an honest and noble soul, but he's having great trouble living with his own confusion. Another individual believes in truth, but he will defraud his tax returns without a moment of hesitation, because these things are open to violation because he does not believe in them. When he does not believe in them, he feels no duty to obey them. All of these situations constitute a problem in life that we all face. We all have the heel of Achilles somewhere. We are none of us above the pressures and problems that bind us to the unfortunate consequences of our own decisions. But we can do something about it. We can gradually weed out the things that cause pain, and anything that causes pain to another is ultimately going to cause pain to us. Therefore, all vengeance and revenge is beyond the way of religion. Supposing we took every case of revenge out of existence, and no individual anymore was out to avenge some real or imaginary ill. One nation to avenge itself against another nation, and so on down through all the levels of society. If this didn't exist, and we really believed the words of Scripture, where it says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay." If we turn these things back to the Lord and just kind of slur that word a little bit and say law, if we return these things to the eternal law, which is the will and manifestation of the eternal power, they will solve themselves. But while we try to play God, we generally do not do as well as we would if we worked a little harder and became human beings. We just do not understand these problems. We can't. But we do know that there is a harmless life that we can live. That this harmless life may result in some sacrifices. It may destroy this tremendous pressure of success. But it will also, in all probability, if it becomes part of a way of life for large groups of people, will end forever poverty and religious conflicts and revolutions. We won't have millions of people dying from the evils of revenge or vengeance or dictatorship if these motions and emotions were gradually subsiding within our own natures. Somewhere in the world we have to come to what Gandhi so well mentioned, that there is nothing that can bind human beings together but the golden thread of love. The only answer to hate is love. The only answer to fear is faith. And faith involves love. For faith realizes that we are in the midst of a divinely ordained universe, miraculous beyond our wildest imagination, incredible beyond the estimation of any intellect alive today, and that all of this is part of something that could be very beautiful. That it is only our own selfishness and our own mistakes that keeps it from being a very beautiful and lovable place to be. And what happens if one person tries to live this and does not wish to become part of this conflict? Well, there are many things that happen. There may be a greater impulse to do a good job when working, that the individual is working not any longer simply for a paycheck and stretching the job as long as possible, but maybe like the Essenes of the Dead Sea and En-Gedi in the Holy Land. The Essenes were a community whose principal craft was building. They built houses and homes for the poor. They made very simple little houses, but they made no charge. Their charity was to see that the poor had roofs over their heads. Also, they engaged in no profit business. They accepted no interest rates. They lived very simply. Even their clothes were held in common. And what happened? Something very interesting. The Romans, while they were ruling the country, made these Essenes the guardians of their children. The Romans saw in these Essenes a virtue that he did not possess, but he hoped his children might sometime know. So here was the bitter, ambitious, militant Romans, respecting above all this class of people who owned nothing, had no war, were never convolved in crime, but who lived primarily to serve. The motto of the Prince of Wales, of course, as we know, is "I serve." It was also the last words of Kundry in the opera of Parsifal. Service takes the place of ambition. Service comes to be the joy of seeing that we are helping, the joy of bringing light and life to the eyes of sufferers. Life and these things constitute the good way, the way that we either have to cultivate or we will finally destroy ourselves. We must realize that under existing conditions we are going to be faced with further population explosion. Maybe not as rapid as we have had, but this planet is going to gradually reach a condition of congestion that it will be suicide for anyone to hate anyone. We won't be able to exist in this condition.
We must all gain a sense of brotherhood, of friendship, of kindness. And we must work for these ends. Almost everyone who has worked for them has been martyred or ridiculed. And yet in the after term of things, these martyrs have become the great heroes of the race. We know they were right, but we just do not know how to live as they did in the presence of the temptations that we face. So in these problems, we have to search for some kind of consolation. Millions of people every day pray. They do not know who they pray to, but they know that somewhere there is something that is greater than themselves. Also, in praying, perhaps they are always heard, because the eternal power that is in the furthermost is also in the innermost part of ourselves. Perhaps the God in us hears the prayer that comes up from our hearts and our minds. But whatever it is, if we form a union with bitterness and with virtue, we overcome much of the evil of selfishness and despair. Today, there are tremendous evils alive in the world. And most of these evils are associated not merely with these ambitions of a few warlords. They are part of a pattern which we are all using in the effort to profit, in the effort to become wealthy in our own right, to take over all the comforts and luxuries of living without realizing that this situation is short-sighted and bound in the end to result in a further revolution of slavery where it shows up. Therefore, faith is our best help. Faith is the realization, in a sense, that there is something important in every good thing that we do. That in some way religion is a practice of the presence of God in all things. In business, in art, in music, we notice the deterioration that has set in which the individual is becoming hopelessly enslaved to sickness and crime. And yet even as we pick up the paper, we see another group of delinquents in trouble. We see more of those who have lived badly, destroying themselves. We see evil habits destroying and taking away the pleasures of life. And those who might have had a long and happy and useful existence die in early years because of excesses of one kind or another. All of these things should mean something. They should tell us that there is a reason, a law that operates whether we can see it or not. That this law is inflexible. That this law will always operate. And it operates in every grain of sand. It operates in the smallest bug and the greatest creature. Everywhere, the wonder of existence reveals an absolute order. There is no way of avoiding the fact that even the tiniest drop of something is a universe of life. These things we know. We can see them. And modern science can show them to us again and again. But the thing that we must learn is that behind all of this, there has to be a purpose. There has to be something that does that which we see but do not understand. There has to be an infinite law. There are no mistakes. There are no changes in these patterns. The crimes of our ancestors are the same crimes we have today. They suffered, and now we suffer. So all this tells us that there is a supreme power, an incredible, wonderful reality, and that in this reality there is reason, there is purpose, there is life, and that there's no place in this power for despair. There is only a great hope, and this hope is really a kind of faith, because this hope is supported by a tremendous amount of evidence that is almost always ignored. We see only a few little scientific nuts and bolts on a machine. We do not see the tremendous spread throughout the cosmos of something that has to be infinite, that has to be big enough to take care of all things, and yet, in some strange and wonderful way, this great and eternal bigness has to be also mindful of a sparrow's fall. There is nothing too small to be part of it, nothing so large that it can escape from it. This reality is eternal. Therefore, with this in mind, we can all be religious. We don't have to be sectarianly religious, although we can be. There's no problem there. But the problem of religion is that it gets into our hearts, gets into our souls, and makes us begin to conform with the great principles which we know to be true. We know these laws work, and yet in our daily life we are completely indifferent to them. We go on day after day exploiting each other, and each in turn is exploited by someone else. This is not what humanity was built for. We are magnificently equipped to dream, to hope, to aspire, to become something each day larger than we were the day before. And yet we waste all this in contention and in conflict, in argument and sophistry. So it would be very well to try to find out a little bit about the problem of faith. And I think perhaps one of the great examples of mysticism in faith was the German shoemaker, Jakob Boehme. Boehme had very little education. He went to a small school in Görlitz where he learned his alphabet and did what most Germans of that industrial level did in those days, learn enough language so that he could read the Bible. He became apprenticed to a shoemaker. And then something happened. Something happened by means of which his eyes were opened. He suddenly saw a universe infinitely greater. Something happened. One account says that he had a pewter cup hanging on the wall of his room, and that one day, as he happened to glance up at the pewter cup, a ray of sun hit it and caused a tremendous burst of light right at that moment. And as he looked up into this ray of light, suddenly the universe opened. Something happened. Something he was never able to explain. But he suddenly realized that he was living in a universe of infinite love and infinite order. That all these things that we see physically are merely the visible shadows of invisible truth, of invisible truths. That all realities are invisible, but they are made visible through their consequences and through the study of their processes. He became a great mystic. He was by nature a Lutheran, and he attended Lutheran church every Sunday, and always sat in the same pew. The minister, Richter, was an absolute misery. He was a sophist, he was an intolerant bigot, and he loved to rail at Boehme, because Boehme was not sufficiently orthodox. And he insulted him every Sunday in church, publicly. And each week, Boehme went back and sat and listened. He made no effort to answer. Finally, once when he was in very much concern, he tried to call on Parson Richter in the little parsonage. And when he came in the door, Richter took off his shoes and threw them at him. Boehme carefully picked up the shoes and returned them to him. No word of criticism. Boehme left a tremendous legacy. Because of his unorthodoxy as a Lutheran, the Lutherans refused to bury him in sanctified ground when he died. And along came a famous nobleman, an Orthodox Catholic, who happened to be one of the rulers of the province. And he said, bury him in sanctified ground where he belongs. So a non-Lutheran was responsible for Boehme's funeral. All these things come down. There were many groups founded around the concepts of Boehme. This concept of the universe of infinite life, this universe of infinite beauty, this tremendous machinery of causes, of which these effects that we see are but a tiny fragment. To keep this universe in its proper order and accomplish what is necessary to maintain it, we might almost say, as they would say in a case of military equipment, it would take 1,000 men in the background unnoticed to keep one man in the front line trench. In the case of universal mysteries, it takes a whole order of life to make possible the fulfillment of one small pattern in human existence. Behind all of the different forms of life, infinite number of living things, birds, animals, infinite climates, lands and continents, all kinds of processes, there has to be somewhere a sovereign intelligence manifesting through a vast order of invisible intelligences. Now, we can deny this, of course. But what do we gain? We don't gain an explanation, because the only other explanation that anyone's ever advanced is that it's an accident. It doesn't mean anything. It just happened. This is very little consolation to anybody, and very difficult to prove if the truth were known. It is better, therefore, as Bacon said, to believe all the fables of the ancients than that this universal fabric is without a mind. Therefore, we are living in a living universe, and this makes possible the justification of faith. If everything is as it should be except ourselves, then it's time to get in line, to get in step with the realities of existence, rather than to continue to battle for selfishness in a world that selfishness is not intended to have. So we find all these little patterns coming along from various sources of mysticism and so forth, many mystics. One of the great English mystics was William Law, who was a disciple, in a sense, of Boehme. And out of the entire group, there have been a number of organizations that have endured simply to live in the presence of a quietude, the quietists. We find them coming to this country, the pietists, the Mennonites, all of these people searching for peace, searching for a way of living together in brotherly love in a world of discords. Today, the facts are getting very strenuous and very obvious. We can no longer do it this way. If we do, our problems will get worse, and we will have more to fear and very little evidence of faith. But unless we make change, correct our own mistakes, and start doing it right, the fact that we are not going to be able to be happy without being right is the final proof of faith. It proves to us conclusively that we have got to live the life if we would know the doctrine. And this is what we all have to have. I just noticed a few days ago in the paper that one of the American missionary societies has made an unusually liberal statement, for which they should be congratulated. They point out that while they are working to convert various people to Christianity, that in this country now, with its complete admixture of practically every faith known to man, all religions must be treated with full respect. This is, I think, a very important statement. It shows a break in what was otherwise, for a long time, a pretty closed corporation. But it's coming. We are going to find the final joy of life in this recognition that there are no real reasons for the miseries that we are nursing. We can, with a little integrity, have employment for everyone who needs it. We can have all of the justice that we want if, as individuals, we will earn it. Now, we may have trouble in trying to earn it, because we will have to go against a common stream that is flowing in the opposite direction. We probably can't accomplish it all at the moment, but we can certainly clear the inside of our own cup. We can see that in our families, among our friends, and in everything that we are in contact with, we do it as well as we know. Not because it is a satisfaction to ourselves, but that the honesty of our own conduct is our living prayer to the power at the root of life. We pray by keeping the rules. And if we keep the rules will keep us. And if we have faith that by keeping the rules they will keep us, then we are deeply religious people, regardless of the sect or creed we belong to. because there is no worthwhile religion anywhere in the world that doesn't teach this very same thing, that everything depends upon the person who wants to become better or to know more, to earn the right to possess more knowledge and insight. Wisdom is the one thing we can all possess without depriving anyone else of anything. The values that we are striving for do not interfere with the rights of other people to grow or to live better. We may trouble them if we take their goods, but we can learn to live the ideals of life without impoverishing anyone or detracting from the well-being of anyone. And the mysticism is important now because we have a great deal of emphasis upon psychic phenomena at the present time. There are many people who, under the pressure of present conditions, are becoming involved in various types of psychological psychism, most of which is frustration, at least in many cases. But in this particular phase of the matter, we have to realize that until the individual puts his life in order, he cannot depend upon his psychic experiences. His psychic experiences can arise simply from the subconscious part of himself and can justify anything he wants them to justify. The only way in which a psychic experience is meaningful is if it justifies a reality that is already established. If it proves beyond question that doing it better means that the individual has better insights, this is proper. But we must realize that the individual's mind and emotions and habits and practices must be refined and regenerated, or he cannot depend upon any psychic experiences from within himself. They are not a substitute for integrity. They cannot fulfill their promise unless the total person is worthy of that fulfillment. And where the psychic experience becomes an hypnotic factor in living, the individual is always doomed to disappointment. Therefore, faith is only valid to the degree that it is earned by conduct. We can have faith in that which we inwardly understand. But when we get through with the falseness of things and get down to the point where our faith is real and natural, it is simply a realization that we all have, that we inwardly have proven to our own internal insights and consciousness that all is in the heavens and right with the world, that we are in the presence of an infinite good which we can love, and in the presence of a finite mass of mistakes which we can learn not to love, but to gradually redeem, reform, and revise in our own thinking. In these ways we can go into the people and into the ideals and dreams and purposes that we want to accomplish. So faith is something we can all have. You don't even have to know how to read and write. Faith is the belief that there is something good that is indestructible, and that something good cannot be destroyed by the evils of men. They can, however, destroy themselves trying to destroy it. And in the end, we have other rules that also must take over. The problem of faith also finds a great deal of justification in the concept of rebirth, because this concept helps to justify integrities. It helps us to realize that we are paying old debts which we probably declared invalid long ago but never met. We are also building toward a future in which the dreams that we have can come true. It's even if, as the Greek philosopher who was lying in the little back room of his house on his deathbed, and the family was gathered in the front room, whispering and talking and passing on scandals, waiting for the old gentleman to die. One of the family suddenly turned around and looked into the other room and saw the old man had sit up in bed with his hand clasped behind his ear, listening intently. And the relative said, "Why are you listening? You're not going to be here long. What does all this gossip mean to you?" He said, "I may not be living long, but as long as I live, I can learn. And this, he figured he might learn something that he could use in some other embodiment, because like most Platonists, that was his belief. So we all can say maybe that we don't come into some of these integrities until what it seems to be too late. But it is never too late. The individual can grow on his deathbed and can become a greater person as long as he has a moment of life left in him. And then when he goes out, the greater life that he has takes over. And he becomes that which he has attained in understanding and insight. And the growth process, the factor of constant improvement, carries on from one life to another, building up the infinite perfection at the end of life in existence. Now, after we fulfill everything that we're supposed to fulfill as human beings, it doesn't necessarily follow that we go off to some mysterious heaven where we remain the rest of eternity. We go to something else. When we have outgrown and graduated and got our BA in the University of Hard Knocks, we then go on and get our master's after death. And we finally get our doctorate after we have become universal servants of humanity. When we've got the job and are doing it, then we mature cum laude. Until then, we're all learning, but even as we learn, we work. We are doing something even while we're in school. Everything has to have reason and purpose. The school needs vision terribly at this time. It needs to know that it should prepare young people to live, that it should help them to have a vision of faith instead of being gradually corrupted into hopeless infirmity of spirit. All of these things we have to do, and I think that there perhaps is better evidence now that we're beginning to realize this than there has been for a long time. In the Protestant Reformation in Germany, there came forth a great mysticism. The individuals of that time did get together and build their utopias, resolved that they were going to improve things. They took away the boundaries of aristocracy and theology and opened the way for the rise of science, the improvement of education, the improvement of social conditions. André in Germany founded the first labor unions back in the 17th century. All of these things were progress. They opened a new world. And in order to plan this a little more effectively, suddenly there was a new continent. A continent unspoiled by the wars, strifes, and conspiracies of Europe. In this new continent, men could build a better way of life than they had ever known. They could find freedom. They could worship God according to the dictates of conscience. They could also live in simple brotherhood as against the tremendous pressures of European politics. It was a wonderful dream. It was a beautiful dream. And it started very, very well, because it was always the search for a greater opportunity for integrities. But the great enemy of integrities is prosperity. As soon as the country began to flourish, it became possible for one to profit off of another. This occurred. It was also terrible to witness the tyranny of religion that arose in this land which we had come to in order to find peace and tranquility and the right to worship God. We suddenly discovered that it had no relationship to location at all. The new continent did not do what it was hoped, because the people that came here brought their old prejudices, their own old conceits, and their old conspiracies into this world. The new world was damaged by those who could not be new people, but were putting their old wine in a new bottle, but it still was the same wine. So these people were unable to fulfill the dream of this country. Gradually, we passed through in maybe 300 or 400 years more than the rest of the world had passed through in 10,000 years. We became a great and powerful nation. We began to develop all kinds of problems that should have been solved but were not. We were afraid that solution would interfere with gain or with political advantage. Little by little, we lost the dream. But now, in this last emergency, the dream is coming back. All over the world, people are again searching for the integrities and the idealisms that must come. Perhaps we are starting because of fear. But if we are starting because of fear, it is because of ignorance, which of course is the reason for the trouble in the first place. But out of this fear, we also have a sense that if we can save it, if we can prevent the situation from becoming impossible, that there is possibility still, that in this world there will ultimately be the brotherhood of humanity, that we will work together for those ends which are right. But to do this, cooperation must take the place of competition. Brotherhood and friendship must take the place of selfishness and suspicion. We must live the principles. And the only way that we can get the strength to live principles today is through faith. We cannot have this faith because we understand everything. But we have to have this faith by realizing that there is an infinite good whether we understand it or not. And if we keep the rules will keep us. That there are laws and principles that are eternally right in the very structure of the cosmos itself. That all universal processes reveal infinite law. All the great combinations of elements and patterns show a wisdom beyond comprehension. A faith in these visible evidences of an invisible inevitable will help us and guide us in the various problems that we face every day. We know from the smallest to the greatest the tremendous eternity and eternality of existence. We realize that there has to be something tremendous, all-sufficient, behind these various phenomena which we now notice. Otherwise, the whole problem is a ghastly travesty. But the travesty is not built upon absolute certainties. Some kind of a falseness is not built upon absolute mathematics. The universe mathematically is perfect, according to Pythagoras. We know now that biologically and psychologically it is infinitely suitable to the needs for which it was fashioned. Therefore, we can no longer say that we are living in a universe that hasn't any sense. What we must try to realize is that we are limited in our own understanding, but that belief in infinite good, belief in the ultimate fulfillment of all that is best, the realization that progress goes on and can go on until all living things become fully aware and awake to the great realities of existence. With these types of thoughts, we can have a little faith, we can do a little better, we can hold back a few unkind words, we can wish someone well whom we haven't spoken to for 20 years, we can forget the feuds of families, we can overcome the mistakes of our children, we can stop looking for gratitude and rather look for truth. We are all emotionally involved selfishly and self-centeredly, but beyond all this there must be the tremendous dedication to that which is necessary for the fulfillment of the plan of existence. If we recognize that plan as real, that is the beginning of a great faith. And if from this faith we build a greater understanding of the processes involved, this is the beginning of a great factual relationship with existence. These are the things we have to think about. These are the things that are coming in. And the fact that we're here this morning to talk about these things indicates that more and more people are concerned, and that from this common concern, we are going to gradually correct the mistakes that have been made. We're going to rise above the criminals and delinquencies that we have been afflicted with in recent years. There is a solution, and that solution is in nature's keeping. Nature is not going to destroy us. It has never destroyed anything. but it is going to gently and kindly lead us in the way we should go. And if we refuse to travel in that direction, we may have a small punishment bestowed at a proper time and in an appropriate place. Realizing, therefore, that we are part of an eternal project, that we are something that's going to outlast all the banks and business loan companies, that we are going to go on beyond the last fort and the last gun. We are going to go beyond all of the conditions of now, and we are going to gradually outgrow the smallness in ourselves. And in so doing, we will gradually overcome the smallness in the world. These are the things I think we have to think about if we want to live well in these very confusing and unsettled times. Thank you very much.